government equitable, accessible, accountable through policy and systems change. Welcome, Natalie. And then we also have sitting here to my left, Ryan Freed, who is going to talk about environmental equity. He is the Climate Action Officer for the City of Alexandria. Ryan has extensive experience developing and operating new programs, managing budgets, and developing grants. He also has varied technical skills in energy efficiency, having participated in many energy efficiency improvement projects. Welcome, Ryan. Ryan's also a newbie. He's only been with the city for 4 months now. And then we also have Coach Kevin Harris, who also is going to speak on environmental equity. Coach Kevin is the former president of the Alexandria Redevelopment and Housing Authority, known as ARHA. And he's the resident association. And since 2003, he's a local businessman. He has owned Hoop Life Incorporated, which teaches basketball camps, clinics, classes, and after-school programs in the city and throughout Northern Virginia. He also serves on the Democratic Central Committee. And we have at my far left, Marissa Salgado, who is the program director for Casa Chilagua. Marissa concentrated on global public health within an international affairs major when she was in school, and she focused on cultural, political, and economic determinants of health, as well as the impact of religion on the idea of illness and interventions. And there she is all the way at the end. And then we also have, not last or least, Councilwoman Aaliyah Gaskins, who's going to speak on economic equity. Aaliyah Gaskins is a tenacious fighter for families, communities, and health equity. And she was elected to the City Council in 2021 and is serving her first 3-year term. She's dedicated to building a healthier, more prosperous Alexandria for us all. Let's welcome all of our guests. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. There will be opportunities, if you have questions, we're going to have a Q&A at the end of the presentation from the panel. So if you have questions, you can submit those, and we will, the number to submit them is on the screen, and we will be able to ask your questions after they finish their presentation. Now they're going to do their brief introductions, and we're going to start at the far end with Marissa and work through this way, okay?
Yeah. Is this on?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Good morning, everyone. My name is Marissa Salgado, and I'm the programs director, as was mentioned, at Casa Chirilagua. Our mission at Casa is developing relationships with families to see the Chirilagua neighborhood transformed by Christ. We've been in the neighborhood for about 15 years, walking alongside our Central American immigrant families that make up the Chirilagua neighborhood. If you don't know Chirilagua, it's not far from you. It's about a mile north of the Del Rey neighborhood, and it is a vibrant and diverse community of families that are predominantly from Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. And our work in the neighborhood is really centered on walking alongside families as they are seeking to overcome the challenges that prevent them from flourishing. We believe at our organization that all of the families and all the students that we work alongside are created in the image of God and have innate talents and skills and resilience that not only benefit their families, but that are of benefit to the rest of the city. And so over the course of our work, we have had opportunities such as after-school programming, mentoring programs, adult education courses, but particularly during the pandemic, in listening to the needs of the community, food security was a huge issue for our neighborhood, as almost 100% of the families that we work alongside lost their jobs due to COVID. As I'm sure Natalie can tell you more about, our neighborhood was particularly hit by the virus. And so figuring out, not just as an organization, but as a community, how to access food in order to keep people healthy, in order to keep people stable, was something that not only our organization worked with, but that our entire community of families came up with creative solutions to be able to address the needs of the neighborhood. So,
Thank you. Natalie?
Sure. All right. That sounds like it's on. Hi again. I'm Natalie Tallis, the Population Health Manager with the Alexandria Health Department. And so you may be familiar with the Alexandria Health Department after COVID. We were the people who were talking a lot about testing, about what COVID is. We might have been the people who gave you your vaccines, which hopefully everyone has gotten. And so really a lot of our work related to health justice and social justice over the last few years is really, as Marissa alluded to, really looking at data and better understanding who is most impacted by health issues in our community and working directly with those communities to come up with solutions. So as part of a little bit of an overview, I wanted to help maybe define some terms that are commonly used because they're often used interchangeably, but they mean very different things. And I think we all kind of intuitively know what health justice is, what it sounds like, but I thought it might help to give a little bit of context. So, for example, one thing that we're really focused on right now is asthma in our community because there are really big differences in Alexandria about who is hospitalized for asthma. So our Black or African American residents are almost 7 times more likely to be hospitalized for asthma compared to our white residents. And residents in the 22304 zip code are also significantly more likely to be hospitalized for asthma compared to those who live, say, in the center of the city. So if we were to approach that problem from a health equality angle, equality would be, all right, everyone who has asthma, who comes in, your neighbor, someone across town, everyone would get the same asthma medication, and we'd call it a day, right? We would give everyone an inhaler, and we'd say, we've done access, everyone has that. If we were to approach it from a health equity perspective, we would likely be doing a lot of targeted outreach and education in those neighborhoods in the 22304 zip code to the African American community about more education about asthma, how do you access that? But if we take a health justice perspective, so that's one step further than health equity, we would really get to the root causes about why there are those differences in asthma hospitalizations. So for us right now, that's looking at home conditions and the fact that a lot of members of our community are living in home conditions that are just not acceptable because of the maintenance of the properties or because that's what people are forced to live in because those are the affordable properties in our community. So a health justice perspective would be working to improve those home conditions, being able to create a better system where we're better able to enforce good property conditions and be able to proactively address it. So I kind of just wanted to set that stage for this conversation to really focus on how do we get to health justice, remove the barriers that have been created in our community to help people thrive. Thanks.
Thank you, Natalie. Coach?
All right. Yeah, this is the one. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So I'm Kevin Harris, and I guess I consider myself a social justice crusader in a way, I guess, because I kind of bounce around to a lot of different areas. I'm a part of a lot of different organizations, but primarily for the same purpose, to help support marginalized communities. And so when I say that, so I'm a part of the board. I'm on the board for ARHA, Alexandria Redevelopment Housing Authority. And what we do at ARHA is we provide affordable housing for over 1,500 families across the city at different levels of AMI, of affordability, primarily at the 30 and below. We supply the greatest amount at that level in terms of individual organizations that provide affordable housing for the city. And so obviously my work there is really important in terms of supporting the residents, making sure their voices are heard, but also making sure that the things that they need in their quality of life can be improved in terms of helping organize the residents as well, which is really important for advocacy in terms of not just advocating for, but advocating with and helping our communities be more organized so that we can get out and be able to see the things that we need come to pass. And so also, you mentioned the Alexandria Democratic Committee. I'm the deputy chair there, primarily, again, for some of the same purposes, to kind of help our communities get more politically and civically engaged, because that's so important to bridge those gaps between our city, because oftentimes, even though we're here and we're talking about quality of life, social justice for housing, for health, and all these different things, but we understand that a lot of times those things are affected by the policies and our elected officials and things like that. So sometimes, obviously, and we'll probably get into that later, but many times when our needs aren't met, we don't have the time and opportunity to be able to get civically engaged because we're so concerned about getting taken care of our basic needs. And so for me, I see that, and so I understood the rationale in terms of ensuring that we are able to get people involved in those areas, because oftentimes in marginalized communities, you know, when it comes to like political things and things like that, it's like, oh, well, you know, that just happens. And you'll hear a lot of times people say, well, I don't do politics, but unfortunately politics are affecting you every day. And so it's really important that we get those education, that political education, and get engaged, really. And so that's me there. But then recently also I founded the Alexandria Minority Business Association, which is really important because one of the things that I saw in terms of all the organizing that I was doing is seeing the fact that our black and brown community were misrepresented in terms of for economics, like small businesses and things like that, being able to have good representation in terms of the things that they needed to support their businesses. And that's one of the things that we do there in terms of supporting not just established businesses, but also there's a lot of budding entrepreneurs. And oftentimes when you come from marginalized communities, you don't have like the business education or understanding of a lot of things because you may not have grown up in a household that has, you know, promoted those sort of things. And so that's kind of what we do there as well. And then when I'm not doing all that stuff, I am elder at my church, at the Love of Christ Church, where I'm fighting a whole nother spiritual battle. So, but all nonetheless, is very important. And so I appreciate you guys' time, and I look forward to engaging with you. And I'm excited to be here with all these awesome people who many of I engage with oftentimes anyway. So thank you. All right.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Councilwoman Aaliyah Gaskins, and it's so good to be with you on this beautiful Saturday. For me, I will say my journey in public service really begins with my faith, but also with my mom. My mom has asthma and diabetes, and when I was younger, we would go to the hospital sometimes 10, 12 times a year. And as a kid, I never quite understood why we went to the hospital so much. I just knew that other families were dealing with the same health issues, but they weren't sitting in the emergency room with us. And my mom worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs to try and make ends meet, yet things always seemed like a struggle. And as I got older, I began to realize and understand that you cannot manage your diabetes if you're working 2 jobs, yet there's still no food in the fridge, or you're missing meals so that your daughter has something to eat. You can't manage your asthma, no matter how great your doctor is or the medications you receive, if you're coming home to a home that has mold and rodents in it. And so for me, I've tried to dedicate my career in figuring out how do we make cities, how do we make places, how do we make communities work for all people, especially when you are trying your hardest just to get by. And so really trying to do that with a lens centered in health. My background is in public health and urban planning, and trying to figure out what are the policies, what are the systems that need to change so that cities work better for more people. In terms of kind of my role when I think about these issues, I think it's across all of them. I don't get to pick, I don't get to choose. I think that being in the position I am here for a reason to be asking the questions, whether it is housing, economic development, transportation, on how do we do better? How do we serve the people in our community who are often treated like the least and the last? How do we make sure they have what they need to be able to thrive and stay here? And I guess just kind of a concrete example, I'll piggyback. Kevin mentioned his starting of the Alexandria Minority Business Association. So the city, actually, we were doing a grant for associations to help them serve their members. And Kevin and other business leaders brought to me, they said, you know, we don't have a minority business association, but the grant that you guys are putting out, we wouldn't even be able to apply because of the way that the criteria was written. And so in that case, I feel it is my role as an elected official to talk to our staff, to work with my other colleagues who are elected, and figure out how do we design opportunities so that if you have an idea and you want to participate, we have not sort of written you out from the very beginning. And as a result of working with him and other business leaders, we were able to change the criteria so that there was a space allowed for if you were not an existing business association, but you wanted to start an association, that we would have funding and support and staffing to help you figure out how to do that. So a lot of my role, I guess, is asking the questions and then figuring out how we act to create a more equitable system. So looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you. Ryan?
Yeah, hi, thank you. I'm Ryan Freed. I'm the Climate Action Officer for the City of Alexandria. I've been with the city for 3 months, but I've been doing environmental work for the last 20 years, and what brought me to work for the City of Alexandria, I live here, and that was one of the things that brought me to work here, because this is my community. But really, for the last 20 years, we've been talking about environmental work, and we've been talking about it at this really high level, right? Today is Earth Day, so you have a lot of people talking about how much carbon dioxide, greenhouse gas emissions, and other things we need to get out of the air. And that's what the people with the money who are funding this work are telling us. That's what the federal government is telling us, are all the important things. The thing that I talk to my colleagues at the city about, when I go around and talk to people about this work, is the reality is that in July, it's going to get so hot that someone's going to die on the streets. And that's climate change, and that's the work that we have to be focused on. And I wanted to be able to be in a position where I could affect that. I know that when the utility rates get too high, when the houses are uncomfortable, when the air quality is bad, that has a huge effect on people. So it's not just staying home from school and missing out on education. It's not just having to stay home with your kids and missing out on that income. It's what the spiral is from that, the many steps down. It's having less money for rent. It's not having access to the right foods. There's so much that's involved with environmental justice, and we keep talking about this very high level about how, if we don't do all of these things, we're all going to be in trouble. But we're already in trouble. A lot of us are already suffering from climate change. So what I love about the City of Alexandria and the work that we're doing here is that we have a really great council, and I'm not just saying that because she's within arm's reach, but we have a great council who has really put a lot of effort behind this, who's really put a lot of thought behind why we're doing this work and why environmental justice should be a priority for the work that we're doing. So I'm excited about this work because I think environmental justice isn't about the climate. Like, the Earth is the Earth. The Earth is a balanced system, and it's doing its thing to balance itself out. What's in peril are the people. The people on the planet are in peril, and we have to start identifying where that highest risk is. So I really connect with what Natalie was saying about what does justice mean, and can we look at what is the root cause of this? And if we see that, we have to make a conscious choice to ignore that. And I hope that we won't make that conscious choice over and over, which we have been doing, so as a society in general. So I'm excited to be able to start focusing our efforts on the people who are seeing the biggest impacts of climate change, the people who need the help now, so we can put our efforts there and then have that broader impact and benefit to the Earth.
Very good. Thank you all. I appreciate your responses. And as you can tell, these are very important subjects that affect our lives each and every day. And the reason that we decided to have this forum was essentially because we want to help people become aware of what is being done to address these issues and what may not be done to address the issues. And we can talk about what next steps will be and how we can move forward as a community. So, and I do want to remind you as we move forward that you can ask questions that we will address to the panelists. We're going to have an open Q&A. And for those that are in the room, if you have questions, you can write those questions out and you can leave them on the side of the stage. I'll gather them, and we can also ask those. As you can tell, these issues are not in silos. They intersect each other. They impact. I mean, you can't talk about economics without talking about health and food security and so forth. And so as I ask the questions, and I will ask specific questions targeted to your area to you, But if anyone wants to jump in and add to somebody else's response, I want you all to feel free to do that, okay? All right. So we're going to start with Natalie, and the question that I have for Natalie is, there are many barriers to access affordable and quality health care. During the pandemic, transportation was kind of highlighted as a barrier. How can the city address transportation as one of those barriers in traditionally underserved communities?
Yeah, thank you for that question. We definitely saw that quite a bit during COVID, especially when we wanted to get people access to testing, to vaccines, to COVID treatments. And I think there's a few different approaches here. There's kind of a short term and a long term of what we can be doing. So in the short term, a lot of what happened and what we ended up doing was bringing the services to where the people were. Right? We hosted, including what we did with Shiloh and Octavia, which is that we brought COVID testing right here to this church, to where people would be able to go, I think, through the drive-through and be able to get their testing and those results in a free, easy, familiar space, which was really important to make it comfortable for people. Similarly, when we were hosting vaccine clinics, yes, we had our big clinics that we did at the high school, but we also did hundreds of small clinics all around the city in partnership with groups like Casa Chirilagua, in partnership with apartment buildings that we would host in the community rooms and rec centers. We were all over the city. Even sometimes when we would maybe just vaccinate 10 people, that was still a victory for us to be there, because otherwise, if we weren't there, maybe those 10 people wouldn't be vaccinated against this potential deadly disease. So I think in the short term, it is really important for us to acknowledge those transportation barriers and meet people where they are with those services. And I think in the long term, though, we really have to think about how is the city structured to where it's easy for them to get where they need to go transportation-wise. So, you know, in terms of thinking about, yes, it's important that we bring healthcare to people, but also how do we create systems to where people can easily get around based on their timeline, on their schedule, so that it's not just when we're available to host a clinic, but it works for them. And there's a lot of opportunities for the community to actually weigh in on those plans right now. So there's the Duke Street in Motion plan right now that the city is working on, which is all about transportation along Duke Street. There are the small area plans like Alexandria West, where people can weigh in on how that neighborhood looks, and that includes transportation. So I really want to encourage everyone, now is the time to weigh in on what the future of transportation looks like in our city. And your voice really does matter. I know as city staff, both myself and Ryan can attest, we look at all of those comments that people weigh in on those plans. So please speak out about that if you really want to be able to see how we can make transportation better. I think making Dash free was one of those really big successes that we hope the city will continue to build on.
If I could just add one more piece.
Sure.
I love what Natalie said about speaking out, and another opportunity that I would just put out is the council, as Natalie mentioned, has made the Dash bus free. But we are also constantly looking at what else we have to do in order to make Dash more efficient and effective and serving more people. And so in our current budget right now, there is a proposal as part of the council's add delete discussion, which will happen on Tuesday, to look at expanding Sunday service for some of the lines. And so if that is a priority to you, I think writing council, being able to weigh in on the lines that you use, the lines that maybe the clients or the communities you serve use, and why it's important to have more frequent service 7 days a week. So I would just say there's often opportunities that come up through the budget process as well for us to really continue to make these important investments.
Thank you. One last question for you, Natalie. What would you like to see the next steps in moving toward equity in healthcare or healthcare justice in Alexandria?
Yeah, so I think maybe building on something, excuse me, that I was mentioning, you know, I think we really need to stop seeing access to healthcare as charity, right? It's not charity. Healthcare is a right that should be happening in our community. Right. People deserve the dignity of being able to see a doctor when they need to see a doctor. on their schedule in a space that is comfortable, that is culturally competent, with providers that speak their language, that look like them. And so I'm really hoping that part of this next steps, all the lessons learned that we had from COVID, really helps us to think about how do we create those healthcare systems that do provide that level of dignity and justice for our residents. So it's not just, again, when it's convenient, right, for people to come out and do, charity healthcare, or to do that when it's out of the goodness of somebody's heart. This is something that should just be built into our communities as something that's accessible. I think one great example of that and how that's going is a number of apartment buildings that are being redeveloped are now thinking through the space that's on their ground floors. So, how can we use that space to maybe offer healthcare services in those apartment buildings? So it's just built in, it's just part of the landscape. One example of that is a new building that's in Arlandria that's being developed by Housing Alexandria. Another one, I know that ARHA, as they're redeveloping their spaces, are also considering how do they create spaces in their building that can have healthcare services in them. I think that's really how we institutionalize these things and create the infrastructure so that it's already ready to go. And we don't have to wait until it's just out of the goodness of somebody's heart.
Yeah, I was going to add to that. I really appreciated what Natalie was talking about in terms of redefining healthcare and looking at it outside of the term of charity, because I think many times that type of stigma is what keeps many individuals from even taking advantage of some services because they're concerned about the perception of others and how they're going to view them taking advantage of these things. And I think changing the way we look at healthcare and changing the way we look at many services that serves the basic needs of individuals is only going to help and allow to strengthen those services, but also put people in a position where they can really have the opportunity to be able to improve their quality of life. But I think that's so important because, even like what Councilwoman Gaskin was talking about, growing up in environments sometimes that aren't favorable economically. When you grow up in an economically disadvantaged situation, many times in your own mind, even as a child, you're like, oh my God, I don't want to do this. I don't want to be seen here. I don't want to be seen there. But these are things that we have to change. I think that it's not just in Alexandria, but I think nationwide, there's this whole view of like when people these are basic needs. These are things that are really things that should be provided for people. Shouldn't have to worry about, how they're going to be able to take care of the medicine that they need when they get sick, when that's something that can happen to anybody. And so I just wanted to echo that because I thought that was a very important statement that you made. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. We're going to go next to Ryan. And the question for you, Ryan, is equitable development. A lot of development going on in the city is driven by priorities and values and clear expectations that the outcomes from the development need to be responsive to the underserved communities, populations, and vulnerable groups. So in addition to using innovative design strategies and policies, so in planning outcomes in some of the projects that are going to be in the city for new developments, what values and priorities should drive consideration of the underserved or the vulnerable populations in the city?
Thank you for that. So I think the City Council has done an interesting thing for us as city staff, and they've set out a list of priorities. And I think at one point they kind of, I won't say struggled, but they really were trying to figure out how to define some overarching priorities. And what they did is they told us there are two overarching priorities, overarching values that we have to look at for all of our work. And those are race and social equity and environmental justice. And those are two things that are supposed to influence the way we do all of our work. So whether it's parks work, whether it's redevelopment, whether it's climate action, all of that work is supposed to consider how does this impact race and social equity? How does this impact environmental justice? So I think those are two things that the city's doing that are good, but I think there are some other things that we need to start valuing in this approach as well. So one of those is history. And I think history often gets weaponized in the redevelopment world to say we need to keep things the way they are. But I think what we need to start thinking about is how we got to where we are. And when we look historically and we understand the amount of energy, the amount of money, the amount of time, the amount of passion that was put in to becoming an exclusive area, to excluding certain groups of people, to making sure that we didn't make this place a place where everyone could be and prosper. A lot of effort was put into that to create what people are trying very hard to preserve right now. And I think we need to think about that and consider that amount of energy that we put into pushing people away. We need to double that amount of energy to bring people back, to make people know that they're here, that the city wants to welcome and grow as a new population. And I think that's one of the things that we kind of lose sight of, because people look at the history they want to see, and they want to see the preservation of their neighborhood. They want to see preservation of buildings and streets and what they define as history. But I think what's important to me is, how did we get to where we are? And I think when you give people that perspective, when you show them that we're here because we intentionally made policies, we intentionally made banking regulations, we intentionally did things as a city that made it so communities of color can't afford to be here. So communities of color weren't welcome here. So we could then have those communities be wealthy, white, middle class, and upper class neighborhoods. And that was a lot of effort that people put into that. And I think today, we have people who want to make changes, who want to make commitments to social justice, to environmental justice. We have city staff who want to meet the challenge that the council has given us to improve race and social equity and environmental justice. But I think it starts with understanding how much work there was in undoing racial equity and undoing environmental justice. And when we recognize that, then we can't just say, well, we tried, or, well, we held a community meeting and we listened to people, because that's not enough. We have to aggressively pursue policy. We have to invest our money, our dollars, our time in efforts that do that. And I think that's what's missing from the message, is people look at that moment of history that they want to see, but they don't look at all of the effort that was put into it. And I think once we recognize that effort, we have to challenge ourselves to put that much more effort into undoing the damage that was done.
Can I add a little bit to that?
Sure.
I think as well, there's so many communities here in the city of Alexandria. When we talk about our diversity, so many immigrant communities, and not just the Latino community. And so many of them have come over the course of the last decades and found a refuge, like found a safe place in this city. And like, what a blessing to us as Alexandrians that our city gets to be a place that is that. But when so many families get pushed out, we're hitting on a lot of trauma, not just the reality of I'm losing my house, but I left my home country and I left my family behind, and I had to come and rebuild this community, like a community in Chirilagua. When a family has to up and move to Oxon Hill or move to Woodbridge, there's a deep sadness that hits again on that trauma of needing to leave my home and now needing to leave my home again. And so the importance of not just seeing these things as, yes, these are high-level things that we need to be working towards because of our history, but these are impacting your neighbors. These are impacting people that are your sisters and brothers and that want to continue to be in community with you. And so really just like personalizing a lot of these things as we're all talking, to see that these are individuals who have been through life experiences that may be very different than you or I, but the importance of listening to those stories as we are figuring out what it means for us to build a more equitable city.
Yeah, because again, I'm a crusader. so I have to add on the housing piece, just because of the stuff that I do with ARHAR and I see every day. But it really centers around kind of what you were just speaking on in terms of keeping people in the city, people of color, communities of color. We've seen, gentrification happen in our city, and oftentimes you bear the grunt. It begins to affect the economic social justice piece as well, because again, what you were just talking about people moving to these different places, and we're talking about justice and transportation. But one of the things, especially like when people get pushed to Woodbridge and places like that, you have now like put yourself away from a lot of services. The metro doesn't go all the way out to those areas. So there's so many services and different things that you no longer have access to. And now you're in a position where if you don't have a car, if your vehicle breaks down, you're kind of like stuck out in a place. And when we talk about prioritizing things in terms of development, that's one of the things I know, especially with ARHA, we've done in terms of making sure people have the right to return, because that's really important. But then also, I think the other piece is, again, when it hits on the stigma portion, in terms of even when you do redevelopment, when we're talking about like mixed income housing, putting those type of communities together where, you know, you have people, your neighbors and different, it's not a concentration of one particular type of people in one area where you can point and say, okay, well, that's the hood or the projects or whatever. Well, now we're all living together and we're having a real community. And one of the things that we've prioritized as well is, I believe, is equity in the way in design, because that was one of the things that we saw in a lot of mixed income housing. When you design the buildings a certain way, and the individuals who are maybe a part of the affordable housing units, they look different, the doorknob is different, all these different things. So now you can identify these individuals, but now what we're doing is all of the units look the same, which is, I think, is really important to creating real community and true sense of community and true equity, because now I'm not engaging with you from a certain standpoint already. You know what I mean? I don't have these preconceived notions about you, but now I'm just talking to you like a regular individual, and we're able to work together to make our community stronger. And so I think it's really important that we see the value in that and investing in people, especially communities of color, because individuals are bringing, they bring a lot of benefits to our community, and it's important that we keep them here if we're going to have a real strong city.
If I could, I feel like we all want to add this one, because it is such a central piece of what is happening in our community, and I think probably the most pressing issue that we need to wrestle with. And so I guess the point I wanted to piggyback on was, one, just when we focus on people, and I love what you said, Marissa, about their individual trauma and where they are in these situations, I think sometimes we forget that there's a benefit to that person and that family, but also to our whole community. You know, I've been having conversations with some of our small business owners asking, what do you need? And I know there are a number of businesses I met with in the Delray community, and they were like, our longtime employees, our staffers, they don't live here anymore. They cannot afford to stay here, and so we are losing people left and right, and even if we increase their wages, it's still not enough because housing here is so expensive. And so then you see the ripple effects in our businesses, you see the ripple effects in our schools, our public safety, all these other critical positions where we need people to help to stay, to help run the city. So that's one piece. I'd say the other thing I have been realizing as I've been on the council is that while we have been clear as a community in some of our priorities, as Ryan mentioned, I think sometimes we have too many priorities. And when we're doing these developments, every priority has a price tag. Everything costs. And so if we have said that we want affordable housing to be the biggest priority, or we have said that we want to prevent gentrification, I think we also need to then wrestle as a city, like what other things might we need to say are secondary priorities, or a nice to have, but they're not the must, because right now I think with all of the things we're trying to ask every development to be and live up to, it has then meant in some cases I don't think we get as much as we might in some of these areas. And that's going to be a hard conversation, because we want buildings that are highest quality design. We want buildings that have art. We want open space. We want tree canopy. We want less parking requirements. We want access to transit. That I think there's a list of maybe 15 or 16 different things, and I think at some point we're going to have to really come together as a community and think about what is our highest priority, especially in our housing-related developments.
I'll just jump in too. Everyone else jumped in too. I want to build on what Marissa said about the stories and listening to individuals' stories and how they are sharing that. And it's not just the issues that they're experiencing, but also the ideas for solutions that they have. Because while the people who work for the city, we're all experts in our own way, but the people who have that lived experience are the experts on their experience and what would make that better for them. And so there's a lot of kind of hidden consequences about the things that we're all talking about, like housing and all that. I think of one of them is the overcrowding issue in communities, and the fact that when there's not that affordable housing, there's a few consequences. Sometimes people move far away, but another consequence is that you have multiple families living in one apartment unit. Sometimes you have multiple families living in a one-bedroom, two-bedroom apartment, which has significant consequences for your physical health, your mental health, your emotional health, your spiritual health. There are a lot of challenges that come out with that. And I think everyone in the city kind of knows that this is a problem, but it's not really talked about, and there's no solutions for it because it's hard, and it's also, it can be very shameful for people to talk about. And I think if we don't start actually having that conversation and talking to the people experiencing that, and how do we address some of the challenges that they're facing, you know, we're not going to be able to get to a solution that actually works for them. We might find some solutions maybe that worked for another place, maybe something that worked even for Fairfax or Arlington, but unless we listen to our residents here and work with them to come up with solutions, it's just going to be another layer of stuff we're doing, but it may not really get to the issue that our community is experiencing.
Absolutely right, absolutely. The next question is for Marissa. From what you have observed, what are some of the contributors to food hardships in the city of Alexandria?
Yeah, the other day I was actually just recently at a conference that was all about data in the Northern Virginia area. And one thing really struck me, and it was income. A livable wage in Alexandria for a single parent household with 2 children is $120,000. Just baseline livable wage. They found in Alexandria that for most single parent 2-child households, that families were making about $42,000. And so when the livable wage is 3 times what you are making, and when you're working 2 to 3 jobs, how are you supposed to decide? I have conversations with families all the time. Ms. Marissa, I'm either paying my rent this month or I'm buying groceries, and I don't know what decision to make. I think other factors, what Natalie just touched on, when you have multiple families living in a 1-bedroom apartment unit, like storage space for where to put your food, in the refrigerator, in the cabinet. When you're living in a 1-bedroom apartment with 10 people, it's probably because your landlord, your management office is allowing you to go over your occupancy limit, oftentimes because of your documentation status, but they will turn around, and then if your refrigerator is broken for 3 months or you don't have a stove for 2 months, they won't do anything about it. So people will go to many of the wonderful food pantries or different places where they can access food, but then take it home and it goes bad because their fridge is gone, or they're buying ice every couple hours to keep things cool. Another thing is like culturally appropriate foods, right? Like food is so important to our cultures, to our well-being. Food isn't just something that keeps us like sustained and living. It's how we connect. It's how we translate stories. It's how we share our culture with our children as we're living in a new place. And while there's so many wonderful spaces for families to find supplemental food if they are struggling, sometimes they'll come and be like, what do I do with this bag of risotto? And so just also being aware of what are like the foods that people find comfort in, that are good for them, that they know how to work with as they're looking for supplemental things. And I think just the final thing I'll say, to the point of like resiliency in food security, like our community is one, like I'm in church, so I might get into preacher mode a little bit here. But during the pandemic, we received a grant to start supporting the Chirilagua neighborhood with food. A semi-truck full of fresh fruit, vegetables, meat would show up to our community center every week, and we would give it out to about 100 families. That is not what CASA is built for. And on the first day, it was an absolute disaster. Our staff had no idea what to do. People were in need, and chaos ensued. And a couple dads from the neighborhood came up to our staff and said, y'all have no idea what you're doing. We've got this. And within 10 minutes, they organized the system. Again, ideas and solutions from the neighborhood. They came up with a solution, came up with a system that we ended up using for the next 8 months, and it worked seamlessly. When we needed volunteers to come and support these food security efforts, who were the most consistent people? The parents of my students who had lost their jobs, that they themselves were in need of food. They would come early in the morning, they would be the last people to leave, and when we would set a box of food aside for them so that way they could take that home to their families at the end of the day, and when someone would come late and ask if there was anything left, our neighbors were the first ones to turn around, grab the box that was labeled for them, and hand it off to someone else. And we would ask them, why are you, like, you need that, right? And they said, well, I know how to pray for my daily bread. And maybe that person was praying for their daily bread, and the way that God was going to meet that was by me handing them this box. So I'm going to trust that there's going to be a way that God is going to turn around and meet my need for daily bread. And so for all of the challenges that exist around food security, I think in a lot of communities that are on the margins, what I found is there's a lot of deep faith and a lot of deep trust, and a lot that those of us who have no concerns about our daily bread actually have a lot to learn from our neighbors who are more on the margins, as they are asking for what they need every single day.
Very good. Thank you. I hope we're getting a lot of insight from a lot of the responses. And I do want to remind everyone, both those who are in person as well as those who are remote, that there is an opportunity for you to submit questions. And following the targeted questions to them, we are going to have an open Q&A, and we will go through your questions then. So keep the questions coming in, okay? The next one we're going to go to is Coach Kevin.
All right. Coach Kevin.
The health of adults and children varies dramatically across Alexandria.
Yes.
What do we, or what does the city need to know about some of the inadequate living conditions to meet basic needs of the citizens?
Well, I mean, I think she spoke on a lot of them already in terms of, sometimes having multiple families living in one home and just the health concerns that arise from that. But then also one of the things that I'm really excited about is having the opportunity, and this kind of speaks to what you were talking about too, is in many ways a lot of our buildings and homes are aging, and while there is an appreciation for history, it's really important, like you were saying, that we don't weaponize it. One of the things that we found in terms of redeveloping with ARHA, a lot of the affordable housing units, was sometimes running into situations where, because they were war homes, where people didn't want to see them go. And I think it's not the residents, but but we had community members. And it's really important to understand, that, a lot of times with these things aging, that they have to be redeveloped, that they have to be made new, because oftentimes there's all sorts of health concerns that arise from these old units. And so, and particularly, I think sometimes when we deal with our senior population, and so like right now we're doing Samuel Madden, but another place that we're looking at is the LaDre building, redeveloping that, which is really important because, again, a lot of times our living conditions aren't good inside, but it's because they need to be redeveloped. You know what I mean? Because, there's only so much maintenance you can do to something. The way we liken it is like a shirt. You buy a shirt, you can only wash it so many times. At some point in time, the shirt is just old, and you have to buy a new shirt. So if we look at housing from that same lens, then I think there will be a greater appreciation for redeveloping, but then also increasing the amount of affordability and affordable housing that's available in our city, because that's another hurdle that we run into when we finally do redevelop. Then it's, okay, how many units are you bringing back, and why so many, and having that pushback. And so it's just really important to have that appreciation, to understand that these things have to happen so that, again, we understand and appreciate the value that these community colors have, and not looking at it again through the lens of it being charity. But this is really important. This is an investment. It's not something that we're giving away, but it's something that we are supporting the basic needs of individuals who are our neighbors. So.
Well, the only thing I'd add to that is I think this has come up a couple of times about the culture and being culturally appropriate, understanding this isn't charity. But I think one thing that we miss is what the broader society, is getting from a more diverse Alexandria, what we get by experiencing the culture of other people and not just being in our own little bubble. And I think that that's missed. So we want to push back because of the density, bringing density into a neighborhood and a wealthy neighborhood. And what does it mean when we're bringing in affordable housing into a wealthy neighborhood? But the culture that you get from that, we can spend a lot of money putting arts venues up, but we can have that arts venue, we can have that cultural experience in our own neighborhood from our own neighbors by just stepping out into the yard and talking to our neighbors and living in our own community. If we have a more diverse community, and we do that by creating more opportunities for people to be here. And I think development is a key part of that, is making sure that we're finding ways to get a diverse community in our neighborhood, because it's boring to just be seeing around yourself, right? We want a more diverse experience, and we shouldn't want to drive to that experience. We should want to live that experience day to day, and we want to hear those stories. The stories of each other are so important. We like to talk about ourselves. We like to hear other people talk about themselves, but we don't have to hop on Netflix and watch a documentary to hear about a new culture. We have so much here in Alexandria, and I think that's one of the things that people get. They get so caught up in, what is that building going to look like? Where is it going to be placed? What is it going to mean for stormwater? And all of that stuff is important. But the outcome is a more diverse community where we get to meet people, we get to see people that we wouldn't otherwise unless we force ourselves to go and find new communities and new cultures. And I think bringing that diversity to Alexandria is so important, because that meets all of the priorities that Councilwoman Gaskins was talking about. And we can have many, many, many priorities, and we just have to look at the best ways to achieve those. And I think like what ARHA is doing is one of those key things to that, is bringing people into a community together.
And if I could just touch on the Samuel Madden development specifically, one of the things that stood out to me is when we had our public hearing, there were residents who came and spoke about the building. And I think sometimes we forget that inherently we all really just want the same thing. And I remember the stories, one woman talked about, she was like, I just want a safe place for my kids to be able to go outside and play. She's like, we don't have that now. She's like, I am so excited for the playground that is going to exist in this new building. There was another person who said, look at our space. Everywhere around us is new, and ours is falling apart. We just want a place that feels like what we see around us. We want to know, I think the person said, we just want to feel valued like the value you put in those buildings across from us. I think there was another person who said, we have a draft. Like every night, they're like, I cannot get enough blankets. I cannot get enough, of anything to be able to just keep my place warm. I want to go to sleep at night and feel warm in my bed. And these aren't groundbreaking things or things that should not be not achievable. And I think hearing those stories is so critical, because as Ryan said, sometimes we get caught up in the other pieces. We had just as many other people speak about, the colors of the bricks and other parts of the building that are important for the design and the feel of the look of our neighborhood. But I think we then lose sight of the people and the people for what they want for these buildings, the conditions that they want to see change, but also I think sometimes we frame it as like you're asking too much, and it's not. We're just asking for basically what everyone else has to feel safe and valued in their community.
Thank you. I appreciate the passion that even as employees of the city you are exhibiting. I think that you're right. At the end of the day, we can't lose sight of the people and how the people are affected by the projects and the policies that we're putting in place. So I do thank you for that. Our next question actually is going to the Honorable Aaliyah Gaskins, and it has to do with economic justice. Equitable economic development is achieved when policies and programs used to spur growth are specifically designed to ensure that traditionally underserved communities and individuals share in the benefits of that growth. So what policies, practices, or programs need to be adjusted to ensure that entrepreneurs from traditionally underserved communities share in the benefits of Alexandria's growth?
There's a lot in that question, Ms. Octavia. I guess if I had to distill that down, there's 3 areas where I would really like to see us make some changes and be more intentional about who we want to serve and who benefits. I think the first, and it's probably predictable with me given my background in planning, but when I think about how we plan our city, from our small area plans to these large, planning efforts that we're undergoing, to me, that is really the space where we set the vision for what do we want our community to look like. It is from there that all of our other policies, our zoning, our land use regulations flow that ultimately shape what our community looks like. And so I think now is an opportunity with folks like Ryan and our chief race and social equity officer and some of the other positions we're hiring to really look at how are we intentional in that vision setting and that planning process, so that we always have the ability to go back and say, this is what we want as a community. These are the policies, these are the programs that we need, and here's the way we strategically use our land, because we're not going to get more of it, our land, in order to make that come to fruition. I think the next part is, the projects and the things we see in that vision plan come through development. And so we've already had a little conversation about development. But I think in all of our developments, really asking the question of what are the multitude of ways these benefit Alexandrians. So a big thing that I have raised on our council is about the jobs and who's building these developments. Are we paying livable wages? Are we hiring Alexandrians? Are we putting in strong labor standards and engaging unions so that these are projects that have ripple effects for folks in our community? There's work we have to do at the state level in order to be able to be allowed to do some of these things, but eventually I'd like to see us have targets for how many developers of color or workers of color that we have on these projects, so that we benefit not just from living in these buildings, but also helping to create them and the ripple effects that come. And then the last piece I would just say are more on the programmatic and grant side. I think somebody talked about the ground floor retail and those different spaces. We have so many entrepreneurs in our community who want to stay here and want to cultivate businesses here. And so how are we, as part of the development, not approving, a large retail space at the bottom, but maybe it's a smaller space that would be a better fit for a small business? Or how are we investing in grants that allow for pop-ups? So somebody who may not have, a full clientele and everything they need in space for their own brick and mortar store could use that space for a certain number of months and allow that to generate some business and some clientele, so they have a foundation to be able to go into a space of their own. But I think it's all connected, and I'd love for us, I think, to really have that equitable economic development goals that we're all seeking. I think it has to be from start to finish, from the vision to the delivery of the project, and then the execution of how we support and get more businesses into those spaces.
And I was going to add to that. I think that, and one of the things too we can do is take advantage of, even to a greater level, and even with a stronger level of integrity, some of the things that are already in place that we have, like, and for instance, with development, with the housing authority, and it also works with other jobs as well, but like Section 3, in terms of giving opportunities when we're doing development in our where it states about the residents to the greatest extent feasible, when there's a job or opportunity available, the resident would take priority in that situation in terms of allowing them to be able to work, get training. And many times in the past, and that's some of the things that we're changing now that I think that are really important, but it's something that we can take advantage of on a broader scale, and even in the community in terms of supporting these communities of color, in terms of ensuring that these things take place. And so, like, one of the things that I've talked about, like being a commissioner, like we're doing Samuel Madden, and we're also at some point where, God willing, we get to Ladre. But one of the things that I talked about is I don't want to see residents just as sign holders. Oftentimes you'll see like these construction projects, and you just kind of give someone, say, okay, well, we have to have this Section 3 thing. We have to hire some residents. We have to hire some people from the community or whatever. And so we're going to make them a sign holder, where we understand that that is an unskilled labor job. And at the end of that, that's the end of it. But what about really investing in people and helping them learn how to do project management and all these other things that now you can go on and have a real career? And that's kind of what Aaliyah was alluding to in terms of some of our unions. They do a great job in terms of training, but also these are jobs that really lead to middle-class lifestyles, you know what I mean, where you can really support your family beyond that specific project, because oftentimes, once the trucks drive away, now I'm back to square zero. But if you have that real training, you can take whatever it is that you learned at that moment and carry it on to another place. And so I really think that investment is really important, and that we hold people accountable to make sure that these things take place, and that you're not just throwing some money in like some little fund and saying, oh yeah, this is for training, but the training never takes place, or just give people some little nothing job that once it ends, they'll be right back in the same situation. So.
There was a case recently, in the last 30 days, that the Attorney General in the District of Columbia won a case against a developer who had intentionally misclassified employees as contractors rather than employees, and thereby robbed them of the opportunity of having benefits, insurance, and so forth. And it was a sizable amount that they were assigned. When I say size, it was close to $1 million that they was, and they had to actually reimburse employees who were, in addition to paying the fines. And of course, the city got a lot of that money, but they also gave a lot of that money to the individuals who were robbed of those benefits. How do we in the city, as we're talking about economic justice, how do we ensure that the developers that are doing the work are monitored in a way that we ensure that what's supposed to happen is what actually happens?
Can I say?
Sure.
I think it starts with community organizing. I really do. I think it starts with our communities holding people accountable and us supporting one another. I think a lot of times it becomes a them problem. You know what I mean? Like, because I'm not affected by that, that's them. You know what I mean? And it's in not understanding that what happens to them really will eventually affect you. You know what I mean? In some form or fashion. And so I think it's really important that we support our communities of color when they are organized communities, and understanding that we're all on the same team, and this is about making our community stronger. So
Okay.
yes.
I would say too that this is a big question with a lot of different nuances. So if we're talking about in terms of holding developers accountable for having livable wage supporting jobs and the work standards and stuff that they have on their site, there's limits in terms of what the city can require there. If it is a project where we have not put in city money, then there are actual state laws that prohibit us from making certain requirements for that. I think one exciting opportunity is in this budget, the city is putting in funding for a disparity study. And the disparity study, what tools that gives you is it's an opportunity to understand who is being left behind in our community. And when we're able to show who those populations are and be able to use this study, then that gives us authority from the state to be able to have some different requirements for hiring and workforce. There's still limits on the labor piece, but at least some specific requirements. In terms of holding them accountable for other things we want to see for development, if it's like green building, we do have a department whose job, and there are certain checkpoints across the life of the development where they have to submit specific documentation, where we do follow up, but it looks a little different, which I think is some of the challenge for every priority we have, who's holding them accountable on each part of that. And I think that's some of the clarity that this council's trying to pull out, because it's also very difficult for then the developer to figure out who am I reporting to? Is this a state requirement? Is this an Office of Housing? Is this an Office of Climate? And I think we're trying to start to get more of these kind of like central stops where it is, this is what we want to see. This is how we will measure that. And here's who you can submit that to. But we're not there yet. Working on it.
Good.
If I could just kind of add on to what was mentioned about the employment part, and I'm so glad you brought up kind of the career pathways, because I think oftentimes if you just look at unemployment numbers in the city, it doesn't look that bad, but really, we have an underemployment challenge, and that's a lot harder to measure, and we actually don't have great data about who maybe has a job, but it's really not meeting their needs, or they're not, living up to what experience they already have. And some of that challenge is also the benefits cliff, right? Where if you start to make more money, you maybe get an increase, then maybe you lose your SNAP, or maybe you lose access to other benefits that might be available to you right now. And so it's really a challenge, and how do we create a better pathway so that people are having that career? It's not just a temporary job, but we have that pathway, whether it's for entrepreneurs or other people, so that it's not just a one-stop thing, we've helped you, goodbye,
Right.
but we're really planning out that long-term success for people as well.
Okay, good. I have a question from one of the citizens, and I think this question, this question is for Casa Chiralagua. A number of non-Hispanic residents are residing in Arlandria area. Are they given all of the support services and are they aware of the support services that are available also?
Yeah, that's a great question. There is a diversity within Chirilagua, and we have been able to connect with some of those families. I think what I love about the neighborhood in particular is that it's not just Casa that's there, but there are many organizations that are there, tenants and workers, community lodging, so many others that have wrapped around that community and that have been invested for a really long time. But I think there also is always room for growth and room for improvement. I think especially too as we have two very different cultures living alongside one another, that there might be language barriers for, there might be cultural differences for. I think something that we've also been very mindful as an organization is how do we help cultivate just a sense of neighborhood amongst all of the people who live in our community. And so that's been something that we've had a lot of conversations about with our students, with parents, as sometimes non-Spanish speaking families have come and been part of our programming and connecting with some of our African American sisters and brothers that are in the neighborhood. But I think there's always room for growth, and when we think about these different communities, yes, we can label them, but always remembering that there's nuance to the places that we live in, that might not be the vast majority of the population, but who are kind of on the fringes of the margins, who is the smallest group within the least of these, and always making sure that there is that awareness. And if something isn't getting to them, listening to them and saying, what are the barriers, and are we contributing to them, and how can we come up with solutions together?
Okay, good. Thank you. Another question is, the person is asking, how do I get access to the small business information to ask questions and get an understanding of what is being offered? And I believe that one is probably for Coach Kevin, because you mentioned the...
Oh, yes. So, there's several different ways. Obviously, connect directly with the Alexandria Minority Business Association. But then also we have AEDP, who's a great resource in terms of when you go to their website. There's many different...
and what is ADP?
AEDP, Alexandria Economic Development Partnership. And so they're in charge of economic development in Alexandria, basically, trying to create partnerships and different things to help our economy grow in a sense, and attract businesses and new businesses, and help develop businesses that are there. But also, one of the things that they have there is also they have a list of all the associations that the city offers that can help support in terms of, and they're connected with our Small Business Development Center as well, which is something that when you're a budding entrepreneur, you can take advantage of. But the thing to know also is, the awesome thing about us is one of the things is there's no membership fee or anything like that, which is sometimes maybe some of the others you may have, different requirements in terms of what you have to do to become a member and those sort of things. But nevertheless, I would say that to kind of simplify things, that would be a great way, a great start, yes.
And if I could just add, on the Small Business Development Center, there is a newsletter that they put out that has all the different grant opportunities, but also they do webinars, they do trainings. You can come in for a consultation. I know when I was starting my consulting business, I was like, I need to learn about taxes, and they will pair you with a person to walk you through step by step what you might need in different areas. And I think there's also a way that you can text communicate with them as well. So trying to meet you in your business and where you are.
Okay, good. Thank you. As we're in the process of wrapping up, I do want to do a reminder to both our in person as well as our remote guests, that if you have any questions, you can feel free to submit those questions, and I think you can do them by email, and the email address is on the screen. Or if you're in person, you can write it out and bring it up to me, and I will make sure I read it. It sounded like, as all of you all were sharing, that a lot of what is required starts with a mindset adjustment, if you will. How do you, from your various perspectives, what are some of the things that can be done to help facilitate those mindset shifts? And I'll let you decide who's going to answer that first.
I mean, I think I can maybe speak particularly to the faith community. Casa, as a faith-based organization, we have over 35 church partners that come alongside our ministry in the city. And I think for us, what we really see is that the gospel at its core, God's kingdom, is about justice. It is about neighbor. It is about incarnation. It is about the least of these. And I think when we take seriously that call to love our neighbor as ourselves, when we look at the story of the Good Samaritan, the question that's asked is like, well, who is my neighbor? And Jesus never answers that question. He actually just gives an example of what it means to be a good neighbor, that anybody that you are around is therefore your neighbor. Our founders asked some hard questions about, wow, my whole life, my neighbors have always looked like me. So is it easier to love them because I'm not actually challenged in any ways? And so I think really Alexandria is a city that is so about community, but really taking a hard look at who are my neighbors? Who do I see as my neighbor? Is there a group of people that I am not including in that category? And just doing some deep internal work to ask together, why is that? And then I think another thing, as I sit and I look at everybody that's sitting here, it sounds like with all of our stories, there are ways, and with the positions that we have, there are ways that we have access to privilege and to power and to connection. But there are also ways, I'm sure, in each of our stories that we resonate with the least of these and those on the margins. And so as people who kind of stand in the in-between, as we're asking a city and communities to make that mindset shift, for each of us to kind of stand in the gap and to be those bridge builders of understanding and of connection, so that people are doing this work alongside one another and not in silos.
And I was going to add, too, that I think part of that, too, is also, like, the language we use around these different social justice issues that are being faced. I know one of the things when we were doing for entrepreneurs for the minority business community was no longer looking at grants as giveaways, but as investments into these businesses. I think that's really important that we change the language that we use around, because oftentimes language is what creates our mindset towards different things, because we'll have people who think a certain way. But then also kind of hinting on what many of you guys talked about, that Aaliyah, she brought up, and Natalie, is understanding, I think, the stories of the people. Like, I think one of the things that, that we in Alexandria, even though it's a small city, in many ways, we're still divided and we have silos, that we're not connected. And I don't think people really know their neighbors. You know what I mean? You really don't understand the stories and the things in the background and the things that people are affected with on a daily basis. So I think once that happens, it'll change things.
If I could add, I love this, the imagery of standing in the in-between. So as an elected official in Alexandria, I don't represent a specific neighborhood or ward or district. I'm responsible for representing the whole city. And as part of that, I'm often in between folks who are on each side of an issue. And I think I have to play a critical role in trying to help one another, maybe hear the stories or hear the things they're not thinking about. I'm just thinking this week alone, I was looking at one of our local newspapers, and there was an article in there that said, council's doing too much. They're doing too much, too fast. They need to slow down. And one of the things it mentioned pausing was our Zoning for Housing initiative, which is a comprehensive look at our housing policies and what else we need to do to remove any exclusionary policies and ultimately create a place where more people can afford to live. The same day, I received over 100 emails from folks actually living in our Chililagua neighborhood talking about, as we prepare to vote on the budget, they feel council has not done enough for housing, that people are leaving their communities, and that they need us to act more urgently. And so I try and, as I respond to folks on different parts, I say, come walk with me, come meet with a person from a group you haven't met with, have lunch with me and another family. Like, let's talk about what we're each facing, how we're each navigating this city, and I hope that in doing that I'm helping people see more of their neighbors, but I'm also helping people see that these are not black and white issues, and there are so many different things we have to think about as we make these decisions, and the biggest thing we have to think about is who are we leaving behind. So I'm really struck by this stand in between.
Yeah.
And I think we've talked a lot about the importance and the power of stories, and I think a lot of that is because we've been in positions and put ourselves in positions to hear those stories and ask people those stories. But I think the question of the mind shift, the mindset shift is so important, and it's hard because, Kevin, you said we need community organizing, and I think that's true, is we absolutely have to have community there to hold the city accountable. I want to be, one of the reasons I came to work for the city is that community accountability piece that's to it that I didn't have when I was working at a nonprofit. But I think that the key to that is making sure that city officials and city staff hear those stories or listen to those stories and feel those stories, and not just show up where those stories are being told, but engage in them. And I think council has done a lot to help provide us more opportunities to hear back from the community. Jacqueline Tucker, our race and social equity officer, was mentioned earlier, and I'm fortunate to be housed right next to her. We share an office space. And we talk all the time about this, about how important it is not just to get there, like not just to be in the room, but then to take that next step and be held accountable as a city to what's there. And we can't do that by ourselves. And as good as the council is, they're not there every day. They're not in City Hall the whole time. They know what we tell them, and they know what you tell them. So the more that the community's out there talking to the city council, talking to the city, that accountability is we're holding ourselves accountable together. And I think that's really important. So I applaud the council's efforts in putting more budget funds into that. We're at the Climate Action Office looking at some grants that we can get to help create more opportunities. But I think the other thing is that we're not going to get the community organizing if they don't have faith that we're going to hear them. But it's also expensive. It's time consuming. It takes a lot of effort. I get paid to do community work. Not everyone in the community does, and that's why we're looking for opportunities to make sure that when we find those people who are always talking to us, when we find those people that care about this, that we're compensating them for doing the work that the city should be doing, that we're compensating them for doing the work of the community. So I think that's a really big part of this, is stop viewing city staff as one thing and community as another, but we are one community. We care about this. Many of us live here that work for the city, and we care desperately about what's happening in our community, and we know you do too. And I just get the fortune of getting paid to do this every day. So we want to find those opportunities for others to do it too. And I think we need to keep exploring those grant opportunities and those city budget opportunities to keep providing opportunities for the community to be compensated to be coming to this, for the community to have more buy-in and more respect when they're in the room. I think that'll help us make that mindset shift. Woo, got me there. I think that'll help us make the shift with city employees as well.
Yeah, and I'll say, so from my perspective, I think there's two things that we can really do to help with the mindset shift. That is a tongue twister. So I think everyone has talked a lot about kind of connecting with people, and I would also advocate to connect with place. So like a lot of times when we talk about these big policies, they feel very abstract, right? They feel very like data, or they feel, it's hard to really picture what's going on. And so if people haven't, you should really get out into the neighborhoods and just walk around, because you see things that you might never hear about or read about, just like what our neighborhoods look like and the infrastructure, and that can really spawn a lot of, new ideas and creative ways of looking at things. I'll just give one fun example from me and Aaliyah, that we were actually at a trash pickup event together. And we were in 4 Mile Run, and it was wonderful to be able to be out and do something tangible for the community. And we're like, why doesn't this exist for the West End, where she and I both live? And so we created a little group that's a West End Park cleanup group. to try to build that community. And I think those ideas are sparked when you're actually just like out in the community and you see that some parks are better maintained than other parks in the city, right? There's not a lot of trash on the Old Town waterfront, but when you get into some of our West End parks or maybe some of our Arlandria parks, there's a lot more that can be done and maintained. And so that's the stuff that you don't really like hear about unless you physically see those things in action. The last thing that I'll mention is we often have conversations about deficits, about what is lacking in our community. And I think part of the mindset shift that Marissa mentioned about the resilience is also we need to spend more time talking about our strengths in our community. We have so many strengths. Our residents have strengths, our community has strengths. How do we build on those to create an even stronger community versus just always focusing on what we're missing, what the lacks are, what the deficits are? Because if we build on those strengths, I think we can really have that shift, again, getting away from charity, but how do we build on the strengths of what our community already has?
One of the questions from Facebook is, what are retirees doing who own homes and whose incomes are less than the living wage? What is being done for those retirees? Are they being taxed out of their homes?
I can start there. This is a huge challenge for the city. And I think we are seeing folks who, the taxes are so high that they are struggling to hold on. So a couple things. I will say we do have an existing program, our senior tax relief program, that will provide tax relief for folks who are in that situation. One of the things that has come to my attention is that in order to receive that relief, you pretty much have to be destitute and like have no additional assets or resources. And so this year I actually asked several questions as part of our budget process on what would it take to restructure that program in order to expand it so that more people qualify or to have some different types of adjustments. We have been starting to get the data back. I can't say that in this current budget we'll be able to reimagine the whole program right away, but in conversations I've had with our budget team, with our city manager, I think we are looking at what we can do for next year because we hear loud and clear that that program in itself is not enough. So that's one part of the conversation. I'd say the other thing we are also looking at is, this goes into the pieces around gentrification and displacement. And so are there creative things we could learn from other communities where if you've been a long time or a legacy resident, like are there additional programs or reliefs that we could do that aren't just age-based, but might just have to do with kind of, how long you've been in the community. Also, are there things we can do to help you with your home? So sometimes you pay the taxes, but then a pipe breaks or you need a roof repair, and now any money that you've had, a tree falls, it can, you no longer have that support. And so are there city programs we can do to help with repairs and modifications and other expenses to help you stay in that home?
Okay, all right. The next couple of questions I think are very quick yes or no. Question for Arha, is Section 8 waiting list open, and if not, why?
Well, it's not open at the current moment. And why? I mean, several reasons. I mean, because, one, there's a huge waiting list because you can only imagine, that's one of the things that we're talking about now in terms of affordable housing, trying to create more opportunities for that. And I don't know all the ins and outs because I'm not like exactly on the I'm a board member, so I'm not on the organizational side in terms of a placement officer or anything like that. But I do know the list, it grows, and also it's not just like one of those things like when you get on the list, because this is another thing that I get questioned with a lot of times, is like, I've been on this list since, for God knows when. But one of the things I try to explain to people is that, the priorities change, it can cause you could be number 2 and all of a sudden shift to a whole nother number lower just because of someone who has joined the list, who they have more things that make them more of a higher priority than you are on the list. And so it's one of those tricky things.
So is the length of the list attributable to the
demand,
inventory?
Well, inventory and demand. I mean, obviously there's a lot of people, there's a higher demand than there is actually places to go.
So is that being considered in some of the development that's going on?
Well, one of the things, for us with the development, we are increasing the amount of affordable housing units that, like in Samuel Madden, we're bringing back like 2 times as many. It's like a whole, so we're increasing the amount of actual units that we're bringing back. So that helps. And many of them are going to be where you can have, the voucher will be attached to the unit. Where you don't necessarily have to have a voucher from somewhere else to be able to move in it. But the thing about it is, once you move there and you leave that place, the voucher stays there as well. So that's one of the things there as well. Yes.
Okay. Speaking of the Ladre building, I've heard 2 stories concerning their existence, one being renovated and 2 being torn down and rebuilt. Which, if either, is true?
So the Ladre building is going to be totally, restructured, so it's going to be torn down. And right now that's kind of like, that's. I'm trying to think in my mind, like, okay, what can I say? I don't want to say too much and get someone in trouble. And so, but yeah, that's the plan. It's actually not going to be as tall either when it comes back as well. And so that's one of the things with the Ladre building. So yeah.
Okay, and the last one is where and if they would be relocated to affordability houses, and I guess this is referring to current residents.
So that's still in the air with relocation, like Samuel Madden, and we haven't even really gotten there with Ladre yet. Obviously, ideally, it would be awesome that everyone can, when we redevelop these places, everyone can stay within the city or really close to where they are right now. But those plans are in the works. I know, especially with Samuel Madden, because that's getting done before Ladre. But nevertheless, we're looking at the inventory that the developers have, as well as our current housing stock, and then also looking at neighboring places. But the good thing is, mostly everyone gets a voucher if you opt when you move, unless you go to another housing unit that we have available. But I think one of the things that is now current in terms of Virginia law is when you do get this voucher, you're able to now take advantage. Many places, a lot of times in the past, would turn down your voucher, but now, legally, that's not. You're not able to do that. Now you have to, if you have more than, like, you have multiple units, you can't turn somebody down because they have a housing voucher. So hopefully that helps keep many people in the city while we're doing redevelopment.
And if I could just add to this point, so folks know, and you can go to the ARHA website, but whenever we do these projects, so ARHA receives a lot of their funding from the federal government through HUD. HUD requires that every single resident has an individual relocation plan and a case manager. And so that's why, as Kevin was mentioning, there's so many different situations. You may take a voucher and look at a different property. You may be relocated to an existing unit in the ARHA portfolio. Kind of the situation looks different for everyone. One of the great pieces is there is a right to return. Now, again, that has to do with your case management. You may, it takes 3 to 4 years to build these properties back up. You may have moved and be having every desire to return, but your life has changed, your job has changed, your things you're committed to, and so you may not take advantage of that right to return. Some of the exciting pieces that I think ARHA has been really intentional about is how do we not just let you move and lose every connection to the community. So we know that if you're able to keep your kids in school here, or if you're able to stay connected to your church, if we're able to find transportation to keep you in the job that you're in, that's more likely that then when that unit comes back online, you're willing to come back because you haven't lost every tie to the community. So those are some of the conversations that are going on, and kind of each individual plan. How do we also think about the plan to bring you back?
Yeah, and one more thing too, I want to add to that as well, because I think this is an important piece too that a lot of times gets overlooked is when people do, because oftentimes like residents, they're like, give me a voucher and I'm gone, you know what I mean, or something like that, or they're excited about getting a voucher. But one of the things that I think is really good that I have an appreciation for that we're doing in this redevelopment cycle is giving education with the voucher. because there are a lot of pitfalls that residents can fall into, like we talked about. One, finding a place, because even though with our redevelopment, the good thing about it is, like sometimes when you get a voucher in a situation where it's not being redeveloped, you may have to take care of the down payment and those, but we're covering all those things in terms of your moving costs, your moving expenses, any down payment that you have, which really provides a great opportunity for many of the residents. But I think also just understanding how to utilize that, understanding also about trying to, because now you're entering into, when you have a voucher, you're entering kind of into the public market. And so, helping people with credit repair, helping them open up bank accounts, like at one of our redevelopment meetings, we had a bank there. And so all of those things, which are really important to be able to strengthen and prep somebody for this next move, which is going to be, really big. Anytime you're making a move, it's really important and impacts your life. So.
What would you say to those who are listening in terms of how they can get involved in any of these issues and help with the steps moving forward or making impact? Start with Ryan, and we'll work down that way this time.
Great. So I talked about this earlier about holding us accountable, and I think one of the ways to do that is, we're out there talking about what we're doing all the time, and show up, call our office, ask us what's next, and see if we're there. So I think getting involved can be as simple as just sending us an email, making sure that you hear from us, ryan.freed@alexandriava.gov. You can get in touch with me. And
say that again a little slower.
ryan.freed@alexandriava.gov.
Okay.
But I think it's just a matter of starting there. And when you're seeing us move priorities that aren't in line with what you and the rest of the community want, then tell us, tell the council, tell others, because we don't know. I really, truly believe that the people that I work with at the city all care about serving the public. They all care about meeting these priorities that the council's put out. We encourage these things. Sometimes we work with the best intentions and we're not hitting the mark, and it's important to hear that. And it doesn't have to be an accusation. It doesn't have to be hard. It can just be, hey, have you considered maybe this perspective was missed in the last outreach that you did? So I think just listening for those opportunities when we say this is the time to come speak, and coming and letting us know, but then following up. Did you hear what we said, and what are you doing with that? And I think that level of accountability for city staff, knowing that we're going to hear that back, knowing that we're going to be held accountable, keeps people on their toes and moving forward. And I think everyone has the best intentions at the city to do this work right. I think it's a mindset shift, and it's that constant reiteration of, we need change. We need to put that amount of energy that's been put into breaking the system into fixing the system. And inertia and the way we've always done it and bureaucracy, those things exist. And it's really easy to fall into that trap, on purpose or not, to go back to the way we've always done it. And I think it helps the community to tell us when we're doing it right and when we're doing it wrong. Both of those are important for us to hear, because it's encouraging when we're doing it right, and it's also informative when we're doing it wrong. So I think that two-way conversation is so important, and it's important to email the council, but it's not only important to email the council. We need to hear it from you too, because as an intermediary, we don't always get that pure conversation. We get the email and we get the priorities that they've distilled, and they do a great job sharing that information with us, but it's better to have that communication with the city staff directly.
Very good.
So Ryan stole my answer a little bit, because I was going to say just reach out. But what I would say is, when you reach out, something I always tell people is, we've talked a lot about stories up here. You have a story too. And it doesn't have to be, you don't have to send, all of the research studies you read, or the newspapers you look. That's helpful if there are things you're looking at. But I think sometimes remembering you have a perspective, you have experiences as a resident in the city, maybe from your professional experience, maybe you're volunteering, maybe even just what you heard on this panel. And so I think just, sending a quick note is really helpful. I do read all of my notes, and I try and get back to people, and then I try and push it to staff like Ryan or Natalie to figure out how we act and respond. So first, just simply reach out and is one. The other thing I'd say is, if you do have time, we are constantly looking for people to help us in making these decisions. So the city has over 81 boards and commissions. They range from everything around environmental policy to housing to planning some of our parades. And so if you have a perspective on some of our more social justice oriented topics, I will follow up with Ms. Octavia, but there is a link on the city. You can see what's open, you can apply, let us know. You know, we've got our Human Rights Commission, we've got our Police Review Board. There's a lot of places where you could plug in, and very often, we have vacancies. The other thing I would say is almost every night of the week, there's a conversation happening about the issues we talked about up here, but other critical social justice issues as well. And so signing up for our e-news or even following us, the city, on social media is another great way to figure out when those meetings are. And I always encourage people, you don't have to go to everything. You don't have to be, I mean, we all have so many things going on in our lives. Find that issue that's important to you. Volunteer in that issue. Go to the meetings on that issue. Send notes on that issue. But you know, really finding out what works best for you and your time, even if you can just give a little, that is helpful to each of us.
Yeah, I was going to kind of echo sort of what they were saying, but also I think this speaks to the mindset of the individual who wants to see change happen. There's this quote that talks about the greatest way not to have any power is to believe you don't have any. And so it's really important to understand that you have power and your voice matters. I think one of the things that in this country we've done to communities on the margin, marginalized communities, is convince them that what they think doesn't matter. And I think I'm encouraging people who are watching this who may be a part of those communities to understand that that's not true. And that also, you know, because a lot of times I know for me, especially because I do a lot of community organizing, is when people come to me and they'll talk to me about things, I'm always like, okay, great, all right, so let's, you know, because it'll be multiple people. I'm like, okay, well, let's all come together, you know, and now we're going to make this next move, and let's organize ourselves and let's come together. And I think that's really important, because oftentimes what'll happen is it'll turn into just like us complaining amongst one another, and it never moves beyond that spot. And it's important, and that's where the understanding that I have power thing comes in, because it's like, hey, wait a minute, like, are we going to talk about this every single day, this issue that we see and we still are confronted with it? Or are we going to say, man, let's come, it's enough of us. And when I say enough of us, I mean, if it's 2, 1, it doesn't matter, you know, because most of the time, you know, the situation that you're dealing with, your neighbor is dealing with it, and the person, you know what I mean? But a lot of times in communities, in majority communities, you know, they understand that already. They understand the power of coming together. That's why we have so many civic associations in our city, because they understand about organizing and coming together and the power. And, you know, it may be only 3 of them. I mean, I know Councilwoman Leah can see that. You know, there's so many groups, and they're not huge. All of them are huge, but they get things done because they show up and they come together and they understand that they have power and they feel like their voice matters. And I think for us in communities of color, that's the stigma that we have to move beyond. And then we're going to see a lot of things change, not just in Alexandria, but nationally. So,
Thank you.
So I'm going to shift gears a little bit from that. And one health topic that we haven't talked about today is mental health. And I think if there's one gift that COVID gave us is an increased awareness and understanding and the ability to talk more about mental health and its importance. And so, you know, I think if there's one thing that people can start doing, it's, you know, we talked a lot about reaching out to your elected officials and staff and organizing, but I think even just being able to talk to each other about those health issues really breaks down a lot of barriers and the stigma around those things, because that's also how we move change, right? We have that cultural shift and that cultural change about it being okay for someone to talk about going to therapy or needing medication for their mental health. And so just being able to talk to one another about those sorts of topics can be huge and maybe life-changing for someone who didn't think that they could talk about that or come forward with those needs, but because they're hearing other people talk about it, they feel safer to do so, or now they know who to contact about that. So maybe a little bit of a different perspective, but I think it's really important that we don't forget that in the larger context of some of these bigger issue items.
I think so many of the things that we've talked about today, you could walk away from this and feel overwhelmed, I think, of just with how big all of them feel and how important they are to the well-being of our city. And so I think my encouragement, especially if you just want to get started in exploring some of these things, is like, it's okay to start small. It's okay to not want to drive 20 minutes across the city to go do this thing. Start with just what's in your neighborhood. Start with your street. Just take out a piece of paper and build a network map of like, who are people that I care about? What are places that I care about? What are issues in those places? And is there one person that I could call to come over for coffee in the morning or go out to lunch with? Just say like, hey, have you noticed these things too? I think really breaking it down, these things are rooted in like the brokenness of people, but also the brokenness of systems that have been perpetuated for decades. And we are all finite people, but I think in collaborating with each other, we can start to address these things, and we've seen that in our own work. And so I think just the encouragement that you can start really small, and that's okay. That is like a worthy and a good next step. So whatever that small next step for you is, don't feel like, but so-and-so over here is off creating this commission. Like, just take someone out for coffee and have a conversation and see what comes from that.
Very good. I want to thank each of you again for taking the time to come and to be so transparent in your sharing. And I hope this was as informative and you can see the impact that can be made through organizations and people, but most importantly, with you. So my call to action to those who are watching is, as you process and reflect on what we've talked about today, that that the Lord will lead you to get involved someplace, because you can make a difference. There's a verse in Psalm 106:3 that said, "Blessed are those who act justly." And my encouragement for all of us is that you all continue acting justly, but that we all think about acting justly and always doing what is right. And we wish you a good evening and have a great time, and thank you all for listening in. Bye-bye.